Welcome to a very special event, a courageous conversation featuring Dr. Evil Patel, the founder and president of Interfaith Youth Corps, and Shane Claiborne, an alumnus of Eastern University, author, activist, and co-director of Red Letter Christians. We are glad you have joined us today. This event will be recorded for educational purposes only and not for any commercial use. My name is Joseph Modica, and I serve as the university chaplain at Eastern University, a Christian university enrolling approximately 3,500 students in its undergraduate, graduate, professional, seminary, and international programs. The university's main campus is located in St. David's, Pennsylvania, with additional locations in Philadelphia, Harrisburg, and online. Eastern's core value of faith, reason, and justice are woven into all of its educational programs. Before we begin our courageous conversation between two outstanding faith leaders, Eastern University would like to thank the Interfaith Youth Corps for their generous Courageous Pluralism grant, which we and other colleges and universities received in the spring of 2020. The concept of courageous pluralism is nicely summarized by Dr. Evil Patel. Quote, American campuses can play a critical role in recommitting to our nation's core values, strengthening free expression while bridging diverse religious and political identities and casting a vision for an inclusive society, unquote. Many thanks to all the IFYC folks involved in the Courageous Pluralism grant. I think of Mary Ellen Geis, and a special heartfelt thanks to Hannah Minks, IFYC's program manager, for her infectious encouragement and capable oversight of this 18-month-long grant project. We are deeply grateful for our partnership with this grant period with Lincoln University, one of the historically Black colleges and universities, founded in 1854, for their friendship, collegiality, and deep conversations we've had, especially in light of the current racial injustices and tensions in our country. Many thanks to Dr. Frederick Faison, Miss Maxine Cook, and Professor Shantae Barnett, and to the Eastern University Interfaith Courageous Pluralism Working Group, comprised of faculty, staff, administrators, and students who assisted in bringing programs to the campus, facilitating conversations around courageous pluralism. And it was the Interfaith Working Group's idea to have this event today. And special thanks to my colleagues, Dr. Tara Stopper and Dr. Lindy Backus, for being good friends, good working partners who are deeply committed to courageous pluralism. Before I introduce our university president, a moment to pause in the midst of all that has been happening in our country and world. A quotation from Dorothy Day, founder of the Catholic Worker, is most appropriate. An act of love, a voluntary taking on of oneself of some of the pain of the world, increases the courage and love and hope of all. May this event today increase our courage, might I even say increase our courageous pluralism with embracing love and hope for all people. Let it be so. Now, it is my honor to introduce the 10th president of Eastern University, someone who has been supportive of this grant and all of our efforts from its beginnings, President Ronald A. Matthews. Welcome, President Matthews.
Thank you, Chaplain Modica, and it's great to see everyone here. Thank you to those who are leading, speaking, and participating in this significant and culminating event. Thank you to you who are attending today's meeting. I'm grateful particularly to the Interfaith Youth Corps' Courageous Pluralism Initiative and funding for this program. Amid ongoing calls for justice, political and social antipathy, and seemingly unrelenting assault on the values that make us human, or better humans, today's meeting identifies what most of us feel, want, and work for: greater empathy, patience, essentially greater humanness, Courageous pluralism, the intersection and confluence of conviction and compassion, is increasingly important if we are to overcome evil with good, despair with hope, and hatred with love, to essentially respect one another. May the relationships represented here and the conversations of today and beyond bring forth fruit for a higher and better way for our nation and for the future. Again, thank you so much for being here and for the opportunity personally to bring you a welcome and to listen. Thank you.
Thank you, President Matthews. My name is Tara Stappa. I am the co-chair of the psychology department at Eastern and have been working on the Courageous Pluralism Initiative this past year and a half at Eastern. Our conversation today will be moderated by two excellent student leaders reflecting the partnership between Eastern University and Lincoln University throughout the Courageous Pluralism Grant Program. Aaliyah Matthew from Eastern University and Tian Chestnut from Lincoln University. As part of this grant partnership, Aaliyah and Tian both had an opportunity to participate in a Storycorps conversation together. Storycorps, which some of you may recognize as featured on NPR, is a program that brings people together in conversation to share their stories and experiences with one another. As indicated in their mission, Storycorps' objective is, quote, to preserve and share humanity's stories in order to build connections between people and create a more just and compassionate world, end quote. Aaliyah and Tian were featured in their Storycorps conversation earlier this year, so we are grateful to them for their willingness to join us today, and we invited them to reprise their roles this afternoon. And so it is my great honor to introduce them both to you today. Aaliyah Matthew is currently a senior graduating with a major in psychology and a minor in education. Aaliyah has enjoyed being a resident assistant and worship leader while at Eastern and has taken a particular interest in racial justice issues on campus. She is hoping to go on to advocacy jobs involving racial or immigration justice and empowerment for people with intellectual disabilities after college. Tian Chestnut is a mass communications major and business minor at Lincoln University of Pennsylvania. His hobbies include playing games and reading, and he hopes to go into a career starting his own clothing line or music business. Thank you both, Aaliyah and Tian, for joining us and co-facilitating our conversation today.
Thank you, Dr. Stappa. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce our two panelists, our two primary speakers. My name is Lindy Backus, as I've already been introduced, who've been involved with Doctors Stappa and Modica in being involved in this Courageous Pluralism project this year. And we've had the marvelous opportunity here to have these two wonderful panelists that will be interviewed by our two student interviewers. Each of the speakers today holds a deep admiration for a simple American hero, a person I like to think would feel right at home both at Eastern University and at Lincoln University, given that each of our institutions have historically focused on substantive change and social impact. The person I speak of here has already been mentioned by Dr. Modica. That's Dorothy Day. Once an atheist, but later a radically converted Catholic Christian, an individual who became a social agitator and founded the 1930s advocacy newspaper, The Catholic Worker, a publication that led to the founding of 160 hospitality houses in the US and an additional 27 others in places sprinkled around the planet. It would not be wrong to say that when it was founded, The Catholic Worker was a parallel faith-based answer, as well as a challenge to the communist publication, The Daily Worker. Like their communist counterparts, their goal was to overturn tables, but this time by way of a vision fired by authentically embraced religious faith. As Evil Patel, one of our two panelists that I will introduce today, writes in his book, Acts of Faith, in her 30s, during the Great Depression, Dorothy Day had started something called the Catholic Worker Movement, which combined radical politics, direct service, and community living. For nearly half a century, Day had given up her own middle-class privilege to live with those who went without, what was called a Catholic Worker House of Hospitality. The original House of Hospitality was on the Lower East Side of the New York City, but it inspired more than 100 others across the nation. Once again, 160 houses today. Imagine that all of this came from someone that J. Edgar Hoover, the long-serving director of the FBI, once called a threat to national security. As you'll soon see, what could be called the Spirit of Dorothy Day, a radical vision of deep courage, married to deep acts of inclusivity, driven by a firm and openly embraced religious faith, will be at the heart of what I'm sure we will hear from our two speakers. So let me introduce you to Dr. Evil Patel. He's an American Ismaili Muslim of Gujarati Indian heritage and the founder and president of the Interfaith Youth Corps, the primary organization behind our event today. IFYC is a Chicago-based international nonprofit that aims to promote interfaith cooperation. And Ibu was born in Mumbai, India, but he grew up in the suburbs of Chicago, later attending the University of Illinois for undergraduate studies, earning a degree in sociology. He also has a doctorate, a DPhil in sociology of religion from Oxford University, where he studied as a Rhodes Scholar. He was asked to serve as a member of President Barack Obama's inaugural advisory council on faith-based neighborhood partnerships. Note here what Ibu has to say about the Catholic Worker Hospitality House he visited in Champaign, Illinois during his university days. Here is what I had been seeking for so long, a vision of radical equality, all human beings living the abundant life that could be achieved through both a direct service approach and a change the system politics. For so long, these two things had existed in separate rooms in my life, a different group of friends, a different way of talking for each other. Here was a movement that combined them. Finally, the two sides of myself could be in the same room. Radical equality and change the system politics. This leads us now to Shane Claiborne, a beloved graduate of our very own Eastern University here. He's a Christian activist and author, a leading figure in the new monasticism movement, and one of the founding members of the nonprofit organization, The Simple Way, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Shane is a social activist, what he describes as an ordinary radical, who advocates for nonviolence and for service to the poor. He's the author of several books, among these his well-known The Irresistible Revolution, Living as an Ordinary Radical. Additionally, in league with Eastern's own Tony Campolo, Shane co-founded the Red Letter Christian Movement, an organization that seeks to take Jesus seriously by endeavoring to live out his radical countercultural teachings as set forth in Scripture, and especially embracing the lifestyle prescribed in the Sermon on the Mount. Shane, too, is a great admirer of Dorothy Day. As he puts it in The Irresistible Revolution, while at Eastern, he decided to look for examples of lives driven by radical models of sincere faith. Here's how he describes it. I went on a quest. I went looking for a Christian. I was looking around hoping to find someone else who might be asking, what if Jesus meant the stuff he said? And I kept coming across dead people, the Desert Fathers, mothers of the 5th century, Francis and Clare of Assisi, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Martin Luther King Jr., Oscar Romero. And then there was Dorothy Day and Mother Teresa, sassy contemporary radicals. Dorothy Day was an activist and a communist, a mother and a journalist who converted to Christianity. As a Christian, she courageously spoke out against the roots of oppression, war, and poverty, and steered the Catholic worker movement through the 1900s, a renewal which has given birth to dozens of hospitality houses scattered around the world. He wrote that in 2006. And this past November, Shane tweeted this: Dorothy Day, co-founder of the Catholic worker movement, died 40 years ago today. She's now on her way to sainthood. But one of my favorite lines of hers is this: don't call us saints. We don't want to be dismissed that easily. So it's no accident that we've invited these two wonderful brothers, I won't call them saints, to be with us today. I think you will see that neither can be easily dismissed. As for us, we are humbled and honored that they have agreed to sit down and talk with each other, with us listening in, and with us and also talking to us. Before we get to that, though, we have a short little thing that we need to take care of. Dr. Modica?
I would like to introduce Mary Johnson, one of Eastern University's students who is part of our working group, but also is one of the yacht club leaders. Mary, go right ahead for a special presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so honored to be a part of this conversation with all of you. As Dr. Monica said, my name is Mary Johnson, and I've had the privilege of being a part of the Yacht Club, short for the Youth Against Complacency and Homelessness Today Club at Eastern. No, it is not a voting club. Roughly 25 years ago, a handful of college students began traveling to the Philadelphia area to hang out with some of their friends who were experiencing homelessness. They shared meals, stories, and wisdom with one another, and they knew each other by name. In the midst of this, the college students came across a news article about several families who were experiencing homelessness and faced being kicked out of the location in which they were residing, otherwise known as the St. Edward's Cathedral in Philadelphia. Upon pulling up to the St. Edward's Cathedral, the students were met with this huge banner that hung outside that asked the question, how can we worship a homeless man on Sunday and yet ignore one on Monday? The authors of this question were the families that were residing within St. Edward's, for they had known homelessness quite well. There are many more elements of the story of how Yacht started initially, as detailed in the book, The Irresistible Revolution, and I have barely touched the surface. Among the college students mentioned earlier, this includes our very own Shane Claiborne, one of the founding members of the Yacht Club, a club that started through friendship and conversations on the streets of Philadelphia, conversations that continue 25 years later. Therefore, in the light of the continuous communion with our Philadelphian brothers and sisters experiencing homelessness, in light of the continuous echoing of the question, how can we worship a homeless man on Sunday and ignore one on Monday? Whether this ignoring happens on city streets or within voting booths, and in light of the 25 years since the beginning of the Yacht Club, Eastern University would like to present Shane Claiborne with a miniature replica of the homeless Jesus statue. It was initially sculpted by Timothy Schmaltz, and on the plaque of it, it says Solio Deo Gloria, and Solio Deo Gloria is a Latin term. I apologize if I butchered the pronunciation, and it means for glory to God alone. It has been used by artists such as Johann Sebastian Bach, George Frederick Handel, and Christoph Gopher to signify that the work was produced for the sake of praising God. So with this being said, thank you to Shane, and thank you to all of our wonderful friends in Philadelphia that have helped us establish such a profound communion of people for 25 years and hopefully beyond.
Wow, that is so sweet. Thank you, Mary. Thanks, Ron and Joe, everyone. Appreciate that so much.
Thank you. And now our conversation between Dr. Patel and Shane Claiborne, led by Tion Chestnut and Aaliyah Matthews.
Hello, my name is Tion Chestnut, as you must know, and with my co-host Aaliyah Matthew, we will be asking Mr. Claiborne and Mr. Patel some questions. The first question is, what does courageous pluralism mean to you? How is this inspired by your worldview tradition?
So I'm going to jump in here first. Salam to all. I want to say thank you for hosting. Thank you for doing more research on the panelists than any university host I've ever been around. I want to say the names Dante Wright and Makia Bryant. I want to say them under the glory of God and in our communion today. I want to invoke American scripture as I say those names. Woody Guthrie's song Deportee, which was written in a different context but with the same spirit. Woody Guthrie was writing about a plane that blew up over Los Gatos Canyon, people who died in an accident, not intentionally in the way that those righteous Black people died, but people who died in an accident. He said, the radio will just call you deportee, but I'm going to name you. Goodbye to my Juan. Goodbye, Rosalita. Adios, mis amigos, Jesus and Maria. When we say people's names, we honor them. The least we can do is say people's names. I want to say that I am a Muslim because of Dorothy Day. And when I met Shane Claiborne, I got as close as I was going to get to Dorothy Day's spirit. So I don't know if Shane still wears burlap sacks and dumpster dives his food the way he did 15 or 18 years ago. I'm actually dead serious, right? But you know, I got to tell you, like, there's nothing like a person who takes the fire of faith seriously. Like, it'll scare the hell out of you, right? Because that book, whether it's the Bible or the Quran it is meant to be taken seriously, and it is radical. It is radical. It is radical. And it is radical in its love, and it's radical in its change. And when I met Shane 15 years ago, dude seriously walked in the coffee shop wearing a burlap sack. And I'm like, you want a cup of coffee? He's like, I don't really care. You know, that's not what I'm here for, man. That's not what I do, you know? So I appreciate it. I so loved and appreciated and admired that. And so thank you for who you are, Shane. And, you know, like, I don't think I ever had burlap sack days, but I did travel through a dozen Catholic workers across the country and spend an entire summer on the road without paying for housing once. That was my version. I am in a different place now, married with 2 kids and leading an organization. You know, people's roles change. Some spirit remains the same, but whatever form your spirit has taken now, I appreciate you and I love you, and I watch you and I appreciate the way your radiance, and Eastern should be very, very, very proud. Right? I know enough about Christianity to know that the Council of Nicaea spoke of the sun and the ray, and you know colleges are the sun, and their alum are the ray, and it's hard to distinguish, right? It's hard to distinguish. So you all ought to be proud, and I know Shane is proud of coming out of Eastern. And so anyway, what does courageous pluralism mean to me? That was the question, right? So listen, I'm gonna throw down a gauntlet. I think that it is a badge of honor to work with people you disagree with. I want to throw that down. Now there are limits. There are limits. Okay, I am not buying a brownie from the KKK bake sale. Right? There are limits, but I would like to put on the table that it is what would the world look like if we viewed it as a badge of honor to work with people with whom we disagree. We bragged about it when we came home or when we shut off Zoom. Do you know what good I did today with this son of a gun I really don't like? Not who did I exclude from my circle based on a transgression, but who did I include who I disagree with and don't like? I just want to put that on the table for your consideration. And then I want to say this, right? That's what I think courageous pluralism is. That's what I think courageous pluralism is. What if every doctor looked at his or her patients and wondered, I wonder who you voted for, and I'm going to decide whether I operate based on whether we agree. Right? There is something really powerful in the medical profession, which is, I'm not saying this is practiced perfectly. We all know there's racism and crazy marginalization of the medical profession, but the ethos of medicine is I come to you as a healer, whoever you are, right? And it's carried out by organizations like Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, by Partners in Health. Whoever you are, whatever your identity is, however much I disagree with your ideology, I come to you as a healer. And it's a badge of honor. In fact, it's a requirement in the medical profession. What would it look like if citizenship, by which I mean participation in our civil society had that as an expectation. By the way, I don't think this is the only way to social change. And part of what's fun about engaging with smart people is putting a half-formed thought on the table. I've had that thought for a while. I don't think I've ever had either the courage or the pluralism to mention it before. But what do people think of that, right? So that's what I'm playing with right now. Over to you, Shane.
Ooh, man, this is going to be a good time right here. This is going to be a good time. I'm thankful to get this chance just to talk, and I love and admire you, Ibu. I remember that first time we met, and yeah, I think you gave me a paper that was a Muslim at the Catholic Worker, and
That's right. Yeah,
awesome.
Thank you for wearing your best burlap sack to come see me, by the way. That was not ordinary one.
Yeah, and Tion, you're going into the clothing design. Let me just show you. I can give you this pattern, man, if you need so I'm so excited to be a part of this conversation. And when it comes to the pluralism, you're spot on, Ibu. I think that we, in our circle, we sometimes say, if it's all white, something's not quite right, because we are as wise as we are diverse. And everything in our world kind of socializes us to fear people who are different from us. And no matter who we are, we're most comfortable around the people who are most like us, that speak like us, that look like us, that share our religion, share our vocabulary, all that. So I think that is exactly what we're up against, is this homogenous rule. And as far as my own faith tradition, we have the story of the Tower of Babel, which was all about sameness. The people spoke the same language, they were exactly the same, and they incidentally were very impressed by themselves and tried to build a tower to heaven to bridge the heavens and the earth, and God scatters it. And that's where we get culture. It's where we get the word Babel. From Babel, we get language and we get diversity. And then I look at that in contrast with the story of Pentecost, which as Christians, we celebrate this month, the birthday of the church. And it goes to great lengths in the book of Acts to lay out all of the different cultures, urban, rural, the different places people are from. And it says that the gospel was proclaimed and they each heard it in their own tongue. And it's kind of this contrast to the sameness of Babel, right? It is the diversity of Pentecost. And it says that they were one in heart and mind. So I believe we all want unity. We all want, oneness, but oneness is different than sameness. And unity is different than uniformity, right? Like unity exists in the context of diversity and exists the most powerfully, like you said, Ibu, when we're hanging out with people that we don't all agree. I mean, I learn more from people who I disagree with, who stretch me, who challenge me, than the people who just say amen to everything that I have to say. So I think that's what I think of when I think of the gift of diversity. And even in the context of the world we live in, I think God's an artist. And that's why there's something wrong with being colorblind. Is I think God wants us to see the world in full color, wants us to see the diversity of the artistry of God. So every person has a unique fingerprint. Every person has a unique DNA, and diversity is divine. But the homogeny, that's like corporate capitalism. Everything's the same. Caesar prints all of his currency with his image on it, and it all looks the same, but we're the currency of God, and we reflect the diversity of God. So amen, hallelujah. I'll stop there. But I love what you had to say, man. I love this conversation around pluralism.
That is beautiful. Thank you for saying that. I was actually about to say something about color, like seeing color and not seeing color. So that kind of goes perfectly into our next question. Why is courageous pluralism so vitally important, in your opinion, in the current historic moment? Like, say more about that. For example, how might courageous pluralism contribute to addressing some of the most pressing issues of our day, such as the pandemic, racial justice and equity, climate concerns, or violence, and other issues?
Yeah, so let's talk for a moment about one of many present and acute issues, which is vaccination. right? So I happen to know a number of people who were part of the Biden campaign and went into the Biden administration. And you know, think about how their thinking had to change, right? So for literally 2 years, all they thought about was defeating Donald Trump and Trump voters. That is all they thought about, okay? And now they have to think about, how do we vaccinate people who all we wanted to do was defeat, who we disagree with on like 9 out of 10 things, and who, by the way, don't really want to get vaccinated. And they have to shift their paradigm, right? That is a really, and by the way, that's not a made up case study. There's like people in the White House, at Health and Human Services, at the CDC right now thinking, how do we vaccinate people who we spent 2 years saying we're wrong and we're spreading scurrilous lies and conspiracy theories, and who, by the way, are saying they don't want to get vaccinated in part because they prefer to believe in those theories rather than in the good science that we think we're advancing. So a huge part of a courageous pluralism is the recognition that you have to live in a society with people with whom you disagree, and that your thriving is based in part on their thriving, right? Like whether I might totally disagree with your politics. I might think you believe in the craziest conspiracy theories. I still need you to get vaccinated. And by the way, if I'm in charge, it's my responsibility to figure that out. So you know, you think about that, right? Like if you run for mayor, Alia, Tiana, I'm expecting this like in the next 5 years here, right? I'm serious, you run for mayor, part of what you are signing up for is to be responsible for people that you really don't like and disagree with. You are now responsible for their welfare. That's a big part of courageous pluralism, I think, is that recognition. That recognition.
Yeah, to riff off of that a little bit, I think that, you know, in this, we are at a historic moment in our country, and the pandemic has, I think, revealed things that were already surfacing, right? It's often said, you know, when America catches a cold, Black folks catch pneumonia, because we see the inequities of, you know, several hundred years of systemic racism and prejudice. And so I think why this conversation on pluralism is so important is that we have a myth of racial hierarchy, right, that we're born into, and the ability to recognize where we find ourselves located socially on that continuum of privilege based on the color of our skin becomes really important, because there are some folks, I heard this definition of privilege is that privilege is when you're born on third base, but you act like you hit a triple. Right. And I think there's a lot of folks that because of where we are born, how we are born, we have access to things that others don't have the same access to. We also have a society that still is affected by this racial hierarchy, this mythology that some people matter more than others. And so, I mean, you can see it everything from Freakonomics studies, you know, where the exact same resume is presented to you know, executives, and the person with the non-white sounding name gets the name, you know, loses the job to the white sounding name every time, like Shannon and Shaniqua. Shannon gets the job, you know, Jason and Jamichael, or Matthew and Mohammed, you know, like so we have that in us. That's why we can't have the privilege of being colorblind and acting like everyone's the same when our systems are not colorblind. Our policing is not colorblind. Our economics are not colorblind. So the ability to appreciate our history and tell the truth about it is where we're at. And I think that's why, you know, we've been saying that Donald Trump didn't change America. He revealed America, right? He surfaced some of that in new ways that now, you know, I think what's clear is that there are folks who have held the reins of power, white men in particular, that are experiencing this kind of identity crisis, right? It's been named as sort of a white fragility or a white fear. I think even a white nostalgia, right? That we want to take America back, make America great again. To many people means make America white again. And we see the changing demographics of our country. We see the changing demographics of Congress, of the church. And there is this sort of clinging for power and for to not be replaced by other people. So all of this is, I think, a really, really important moment. And it's no coincidence that it comes on the back of the first Black president, the Black Lives Matter movement, and we see it on almost every facet of our society, right? Even the battle between all lives matter and Black Lives Matter. And we have to be able to sort of name that and say, well, we can't say all lives matter until we can emphatically say that Black Lives Matter. Until Black Lives Matter, we can't say all lives matter. And especially in light of our history, where Black folks have been sold as property, where Native folks were slaughtered, where we put, Japanese folks in internment camps. Until we can name some of that history, we can't get our future right. And so I think that's why the battle around the statues, I mean, literally in Tennessee, where I am right now, we still have a statue of Nathan Bedford Forrest, one of the founders and key leaders of the KKK, is in our capital. So this is how we remember history. How we're going to get our future right is at stake right now. And I think we have this battle between fear and love. And we've got, our scripture in the Christian, New Testament, it says perfect love casteth out fear. And so I think we have these two forces that are competing for our loyalty right now, love and fear. And the question that we can be asking is, what would it look like if America and our policies around immigration, guns, healthcare was driven more by love than by fear?
Well, that was very informing. Definitely, it definitely changed my point of view about a lot of things. But tell us more about the work that you are doing that speaks to your courageous pluralism. We're gonna have Mr. Claiborne go first, and then Mr. Patel, you go second.
Well, I've sort of got 2 feet that I walk on. One is in our local community in North Philadelphia, the Simple Way, which was born out of the yacht club. Mary kind of shared some of that. We ended up moving into North Philadelphia, a neighborhood which incidentally is really diverse. One of the most diverse zip codes in Pennsylvania. Our neighborhood in a lot of ways looks like the United Nations. We've got young folks, old folks. We've got folks from Puerto Rico and Dominican, folks from Korea. So it's really an amazing neighborhood. And so we're trying to live out the hospitality of Dorothy Day. Ibu knows this. A lot of folks have called us the Protestant Catholic worker. So we're trying to live in that spirit of hospitality, which right now means my neighbors have stepped up on everything. They're a COVID testing center. They're delivering bags of food to seniors. I mean, all kinds of things to try to say, what does love look like right now? Even in the middle of a pandemic. So there's that kind of local side, but there's also the side of things where we address these systemic issues, right? Where Martin Luther King said, we're all called to be the Good Samaritan and to show compassion on the person that's wounded in the ditch. But after you lift so many people out of the ditch, you start to say, maybe we need to do something about the road to Jericho. So folks don't keep ending up in the ditch to begin with. So that's a lot of my work, around the country right now has been trying to address some of these systemic injustices. And I'll name one of them that I don't know if I've gotten to show you this or not, Ibu, but we've been inspired by the prophets, Micah and Isaiah, who both spoke of a world where people will beat their swords into plows and their spears into pruning hooks. And we started thinking, what does that look like? In America, we don't have a ton of swords, but we got a whole lot of guns. And so we started inviting people to donate guns. And actually, this work started in my neighborhood in North Philadelphia, where we've seen way too many lives lost to guns and lost to police and lost to violence. And so we started taking donated guns and turning them into garden tools. And this is a shovel that's made out of a gun. And actually even the wood is from the wood stock of the gun. And we've been making these plows, garden tools out of the guns. And I've been making these crosses out of the barrel of a gun. So that's kind of the work that I've been doing, but it's symbolic, but it's more than that, right? Because we've done these weapons transformations on street corners. We've done them with the family of Tamir Rice in Ohio. We've done them with folks that have lost their loved ones, like my friend Sharon Risher, whose mother was killed in the Charleston shooting in the Mother Emanuel AME Church, right? So Dylan Roof, fueled by hatred and racism, went in and killed them during worship, as many of us remember. And her mother was killed, and she's beating on this gun, right? And weeping, and she names all 9 of the Emanuel 9 that were killed, including her mother. And then she told me afterwards, she said, there was something good happening in my soul as I beat on that gun. And she said, and everything I wanted to do to Dylan Roof, I just took out on the metal of that gun. So I think, as we're doing this work, it is symbolic, but it's also making space for public lament to honor the trauma and the pain of folks who have suffered from violence in all of its different forms, right? The violence that we've seen from the very beginning of our country. So that's just one little, thing that I've been doing. And even in the pandemic, we got our blacksmithing equipment, and I've got a huge pile of guns over here. So it's also therapeutic. After almost every day we hear another person killed by police or another mass shooting. And so it's good for my soul to get out to the forge and beat the crud out of some gunmetal. So
I think it's so beautiful, man. Like that's like you said God is an artist, right? Like that's God created us so that we could be creators too. And that's a recreation, right? That's a recreation. So beautiful. And I love obviously the biblical, the Hebrew, but it's just powerful. I love it. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for doing it, and thank you for sharing it. So Tian, the question was, what are we doing to advance courageous pluralism? Part of what we do is we partner campuses, right? Like Eastern and Lincoln, we're super proud of that. IFYC, our network is principally college campuses. It's young people like you, Aaliyah and Tian. And so we love you all becoming interfaith leaders and you leading events like this. And one of the things we love to do is give people scenario challenges, so it's one of our kind of key teaching techniques. And so here's a scenario. We won't talk about this any further, but the kind of challenge we would give people is a guy named Hawk, who's a Black Lives Matter activist from New York, goes to DC to a protest and finds himself, there are dueling protests at this time, finds himself in the middle of a MAGA rally. And the MAGA folks say, we believe in free speech. We're going to give you 3 minutes on our stage to address our people. So if that's you, what do you say? You have 3 minutes to address people with who you really disagree with. And they're listening. Let's just assume they're listening. What do you say? Right? And it's a great story. It's, you could look it up. You could look up Hawk at the BLM activist at the MAGA rally. You can read about it in Arthur Brooks's great book, Love Your Enemies. But that's a great kind of pedagogical case study. If you're in a situation where you find yourself in the middle of a rally of the opposing group, and it's not, and you don't feel physically threatened, and they invite you on their stage and say, give us your best case in 3 minutes, what do you say? Right? And I think that's part of courageous pluralism. Again, within your zone of feeling safe, which is not always comfortable, right? I don't want anybody to feel physically threatened, but what does it look like to be in the realm of safe but uncomfortable, engaging people with whom you disagree?
I think that goes really well with another question we have, because we have a world that has advocacy in it today. You know, we have a lot of people want to step onto that and say, wow, I'm an advocate. And one of the best ways they do it is, oh, I'm going to share something, I'm going to speak. So what are ways you would say we can be allies to courageous pluralism?
Well, I'll just start briefly because I want to hear more about what Ibu's been doing, because I think that work is exactly what we need right now. We're really good at talking at each other, but not with each other. And one of the things that I would say as a white person is that we are really quick to grab the mic, and we even have a whole theology that is that we're to be a voice for the voiceless. And there's great folks that have used that language, Mother Teresa, Oscar Romero, many folks that, and it's even in the scripture, you know. But I think that sometimes we are quick to be a voice for people who are not voiceless. They have voices, and rather than grabbing the mic, we should hold the mic. We should stand beside them or behind them rather than in front of them, trying to be a voice for them, because I think there's a lot of voices that are not being heard. And it doesn't solve this problem by those who have privilege or access to the mic just to grab it on their behalf. So I think that's what, you know, it looks like to stand in solidarity. It's why I'm resistant to the idea that we're to be a voice for the voiceless when people actually have voices themselves. So I think that, and some of that, you know, we wrestled with this, even in the story that Mary told, where homeless mothers and children were living in an abandoned cathedral. We came as suburban college students, and we quickly had to wrestle with this privilege, because the equation changed when 50 students from the suburbs were willing to go to jail. And so we had to posture ourselves where we're standing behind and beside rather than just in front of. We're not just a human shield. We're not there to be the savior. We're there to stand in solidarity. And that too comes from my faith. You know, seeing Jesus as one that didn't just come to help the poor, but he was born as a brown-skinned Palestinian refugee in the middle of a genocide, died on the cross. Like, everything that Jesus does is an act of divine solidarity, right? A God that leaves the comfort of heaven to lean into the struggle of those who are on, being marginalized. So that shapes, who I am.
Yeah. Thank you for this question, Alia. So I'll give you a very specific contemporary case study, right? So I'll tell you a leading religious figure with whom I really disagree on like lots of things, and that's Franklin Graham. I really disagree about the ugly things he said about Muslims. I really disagree with his full-throated support of Donald Trump. I disagree at all kinds of things. And a couple of weeks ago, he came out in support of vaccination. And I really think people getting vaccinated is important. I think it's about life. I think it's about getting the only chance we have to build back better is if we can come out and re-engage each other. So one of the questions I ask myself is, if I got a call from Franklin Graham and he said, let's work together on vaccination, would I say yes? And I like to ask myself those really challenging questions, right? Like it's no fun to ask yourself, and I mean this both in an intellectual way and an ethical way. It's no fun to ask yourself easy questions all the time, right? It's no fun to find the facts and the cases that simply affirm your ideology. It's always interesting to ask questions that stretch your intellect and that make you question how your ethics and your ideology might be applied. And so that's a really interesting one for me, right? And just to get one step further, right? We're starting to work with a great pastor. Some of you might know him, a guy named Curtis Chang, on the vaccination effort. He's probably the most prominent guy making videos about the Bible and the vaccine right now. And Curtis was telling a story about engaging a pastor that's even to the right of Franklin Graham on the vaccination effort, and that's Robert Jeffers. And in making a video with Robert Jeffers in Dallas, full-throated supporter of Donald Trump, for example, Robert Jeffers quotes Donald Trump. Now, why does he do that? In part because a lot of Trump supporters are refusing or hesitant to get the vaccine. So in effect, part of what Robert Jeffers is doing is signaling symbolic understanding of a community of people that he understands that he's a part of, so that he can nudge them towards doing something that they are reluctant to do. It's a strategy that affirms something I really don't like in the service of something else that I think is really positive. And I think that these are really interesting challenges, and I don't think that they're easy, right? I don't, and this is why we have an entire discipline called philosophy, not so we can find the easy cases that affirm our current way of thinking, but so that we can look for the challenging cases to stretch our intellect and to, I think, even deepen our ethics. So I don't know how I would answer those things, right? But there's a great line from Game of Thrones. Varys, one of the advisors to the throne, says, "You make peace with your enemies, not your friends." Right? Everybody knows that making peace is to be valued. Everybody knows that making peace, when somebody's called a peacemaker, it's an honor, right? Well, you don't make peace with your friends, make peace with your enemies. So it's a very interesting question to ask. What good are we willing to do with people who we think are bad? What good are we willing to do with people who we think are bad? I don't think that's an easy question. I don't ask that because I think I'm so clever. I ask that because I think that's such a challenge. But I think that that's what courageous pluralism is. The whole point of courageous pluralism is, if it's easy, it's not courageous, obviously, right? If it's your friend, you're not making peace. The part of the courage of it is that you have to pause and ask yourself the question, is this partnership gonna benefit the world more or hurt the world more? Because it's hard for me to do.
Okay, I definitely feel as though, people are very, there's definitely some sense of accomplishment when you, I don't want to say forgive somebody that you don't like, but learn from somebody that may not be up to your morals and standards. But the next question, we've talked about what courageous pluralism is. Can we talk about the opposite, or what it is not? I'll have Mr. Patel go first.
Yeah, I think what courageous pluralism is not is being around people with whom you agree all the time, and never asking yourself hard questions that would stretch your intellect and make you kind of texture your ethics, right? So I think courageous pluralism is, to quote kind of Shane earlier, is if you're consistently only with people with whom you agree almost all the time. I think that's the opposite of courageous pluralism. I think the definition of courageous pluralism is at least considering how you would engage with people with whom you disagree.
I'm going to go out on a limb here and take a risk and use a musical metaphor with the musical expert, President Matthews, on the call here. But, I think the opposite of courageous pluralism, sort of like a symphony of French horns. You know, that they're beautiful when they're playing in the diversity of all the other instruments, I understand. You know, and a symphony is beautiful when you have all the different instruments playing together, when you have harmonies that are working together. So in the organization I'm a part of, Red Letter Christians, we talk a lot about harmonizing, but not homogenizing, right? And the harmonizing comes from the diversity of voices, but the opposite of the harmony is the homogenizing, right? Just trying to make everybody the same, or staying behind the safe, comfortable boundaries of, cultural sameness. And it's just exactly what Dr. King lamented when he said, one of the most segregated hours in the world is 11 o'clock on Sunday morning when the church gathers for worship. We often mirror the patterns of segregation and sameness rather than the kind of prophetic vision of diversity.
I remember something that Eastern does a lot is they have opportunities for students to go into places that they've never been. If that means, a different place of worship, if that means, a different community that they've never entered into. That's one of the ways that we challenge that. But I think it's common, especially for my generation, for us to have a hard time figuring out how we can create places of uncomfortability but safeness, and doing it purposely. So I suppose the next question I would ask is, how might we develop civic friendships with people who are different than us? Or like how might this help promote courageous pluralism?
So I talk a lot about the civic. I'm a big nerd about the civic. And the way I describe the civic are spaces and activities that bring people of different identities and ideologies together, because people generally think they're a good thing, right? So people generally don't disagree with hospitals. They generally don't disagree with schools. They generally don't disagree with Little League Baseball. They generally don't disagree with PTAs. They generally don't disagree with volunteer fire departments. And so you don't have to kind of declare an ideology to come into that space, right? Like, people generally agree a Little League Baseball league, a baseball league is important, and you could get atheists and hardcore Christians. You could get Trump supporters and Biden supporters. You could get QAnon theorists, and you could get whatever else there, right? And I think that that's really important. I mean, I have a huge admiration for Dolly Parton, because she creates a space where people at her concerts, if you listen to her music, or if you have been watching the documentaries or listen to the podcast about her, she is very deliberate about creating a space where people from all backgrounds can come together, right? That is part of her service to the world. Now, she will also say things, a great line, right? Of course, Black Lives Matter, she says. You think our white butts are the only ones that matter, right? Like there are some things that are obvious. Like, we're not being stupid here, right? The earth is not flat, right? The KKK are not legitimate. Like, we're not being stupid. But broadly speaking, we're not kicking people who voted differently out of our Little League, right? We're not kicking people who voted differently off the PTA. That's the civic. And what a civic friendship is the relationship that is developed in order to advance that activity or space that people generally think is a good thing. And so I'll give you a quick example of this. So, both my boys played travel basketball, and a year or two ago, the guy who founded the league retweeted a Trump tweet about the American flag, about like not kneeling before the flag, right? And my wife looks at this on her phone and says, "My God, like, I can't believe this guy did this," And she looks at me, she's like, "Do we really want our boys to play in this league?" And I kind of thought about it for a second, and I'm like, do I really want my boys to think that basketball is something you only play with people with whom you politically agree? Like, isn't part of the value of a sports league that you are going to be doing pick and rolls with people with whom you don't politically agree. Now, again, I am not inviting overt racists into my basketball league, but I really like the idea that, if I believe that diversity is not just the differences you like, right? I really like the idea of there being an activity that I'm engaged in with people with whom I disagree, in which we're working together. So that's a civic friendship. That's a civic friendship.
This story came to my head, and I haven't told Ibu this, so I think you'll appreciate this story, because it actually, as I was listening to you, it's a really clear example of how I've seen civic friendship and this kind of courageous pluralism work out. So I was speaking in another country. This is before the pandemic, and we had a credible death threat, a violent threat that we reported. We generally do that, and we got a report back that they had explored it, and it did look like a credible threat. They know where the guy is, all this stuff. So anyway, I get over there, and we have a little ramped up security. It's, a few thousand people at this little festival, and I get there and I'm eating lunch, and this guy comes and sits beside me, and we start talking, and he says he's from Iraq, and I was like, wow, it's incredible. I've been to Iraq before, I've been a couple of times, and we're talking together as we eat. And then he says, I said, what brought you here? And he said, well, I'm here because of you, for you. And I thought, oh, wow. And I thought he came to hear me speak, and I keep talking. I said, how did you even hear of me? And he goes, oh, no. I'm here. Well, I'm here, kind of undercover. And so I realized he's a part of the security. There's a security team here that's like, and he goes on to tell me he's Muslim, right? And so we start talking, and he comes to hear me preach, and I'm here. I am. I'm realizing this Muslim brother is risking his life to protect me as I preach the gospel as I understand it, right? And I'm like moved to tears. And he starts telling me how much he respects Jesus, and he's teaching his kids to respect Jesus. And he says, I have my kids go to church sometime because I want them to be good Muslims. I want them to grow up, really appreciating Jesus. And so we talk. And then the last day I was giving my final sermon, and he said, I'm off tomorrow. So, I gave him a hug the night before. I didn't think I'd see him again. And I look out and I see him on the front row. And I came up to him before I went up speaking. I said, what are you, I thought you were off. And he said, man, I couldn't miss the last sermon. And so he showed up, and it's one of the most powerful experiences I had. I mean, everything was happening in between, reading between the lines, in between the sessions. And I thought, maybe part of the reason I was at this event was just to make a new friend, and to see the power of someone else, embodying the very stuff that we're talking about, right? So I mean, he's extending to me the same love and hospitality that I hope I would extend to others. And exactly like Ibu said, even the people that I disagree with, there's so much in scripture that says if your enemy is hungry, feed them. Like we're to treat others like we hope they treat us. And I think even the very peculiar story of the Lord sets a table in the presence of our enemies. I've often pondered, like, why in the world, am I going to want to have dinner with all my enemies? And I wonder if, like, it actually isn't God saying, okay, I want to know how Shane treated you all. Like, why else would God set a table with our enemies except to maybe give account for how we treated those who disagree with us? So I can't control them, how they're going to treat me, but I can certainly control, the things that I want for people, even that I disagree with, the people that might even want to rob me of some of the rights that I'm entitled to. I want to wear them down with love. So that's kind of what I think of.
Yeah, I think that's so profound, Shane. That right? Like why? So I'll respond to your Christian story with the Muslim one. So the city of Medina is the city that the Prophet Muhammad goes to in the year 622 after he's hounded and harassed out of Mecca, right? But Medina is not the original name of the city. The original name is Yathrib, and it wasn't actually a city. it was a geographical area where there were 20 tribes that were constantly warring. How does it become Medina, the city of the prophet? When the prophet goes there and creates something called the Constitution of Medina, which is a pact of mutual loyalty between the tribes. The city becomes holy when peace is brought to the city. And the prophet brings peace by getting these tribes, not all to convert to Islam. That was some of them did, right? But when they agree to be in a pact of mutual loyalty with each other, right? And I think that there is a holiness to bringing about that cooperation, right? And somebody said earlier, you don't have oneness without diversity, right? Like, so e pluribus unum, out of many one. Daniel Allen, the great political theorist at Harvard, says the goal of a diverse society actually shouldn't be oneness, certainly shouldn't be sameness, as you said, Shane. It should be wholeness, right? That we need each other to be whole. And that is actually a theological concept, right? That and Quranically, God made you different nations and tribes that you may come to know one another. Like, if God didn't want you to be diverse, he wouldn't have made you diverse, right? And again, to do some theology here, you spoke about the Tower of Babel earlier in Pentecost, and each heard God in his own tongue, right? So there's an Ismaili Muslim scholar who writes this beautiful insight. He's like, the Quran comes to the Arabs of the 7th century in Arabic. Do you think God only speaks Arabic, is what he says? No. The message is not the superiority of Arabic. The message is that God chooses to help to facilitate your understanding of him. Of course, the way Christians believe that is that God becomes man, and so facilitates the understanding through the form of Jesus. The way Muslims understand it is that God chooses to come to the Arabs in Arabic. He's facilitating our understanding of him. But God speaks infinite languages, and he creates people in infinite cultures, right? He wants that diversity, and he wants us to connect with him through our own particularity. So I love the kind of sacred text behind social diversity, right? This is a civic project, but it's also a sacred project.
Mr. Patel, I see the IFYC is working with the CCCU. And would you mind telling us more about that?
Yeah, so IFYC is a great partnership with the CCCU, which is the consortium of more evangelical colleges. In fact, we're doing a major partnership with them around vaccine education, but we've done a bunch of stuff with them before. So here's what's funny, right? So Shirley Hoekstra is the president of the CCCU. She and I are different in all kinds of ways. She's Dutch Reform Christian. I'm an Ismaili Muslim. She's white. I'm not. Blah blah blah. But she's the nicest, smartest person in the world. And part of what I always try to do is just like work with people who I personally like. And I actually think that that's, I think that it's wonderful to find people with whom you have big disagreements and also personally like. Again, there are parameters, right? I'm not looking for charming overt racists, but I think about the friendship between Scalia, Antonin Scalia, the most conservative of the Supreme Court justices, maybe save Clarence Thomas, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the most liberal. And they're like in the Middle East together, riding camels, and they're going to the opera together. I think that's a really beautiful thing. And actually it translates into the powerful professional stuff also. So when Scalia writes his decision against against allowing women into the Virginia Military Institute, he gives it to Ginsburg early because he knows she's going to disagree, and he wants to do her the courtesy of giving her extra time to form her disagreement, right? That's a courtesy built of friendship. I really think like friendship is a blessing. It's a mercy. And I think it is a gift to be able to form friendships across lines of disagreement. I actually think that's one of the greatest tragedies of a tribalized age, that we can, it feels like we can only be friends with people with whom we agree. I don't want, like, I'm interested within parameters of decency, being friends with people with whom I disagree.
Yeah, that's right.
Those are such amazing words and beautiful like concepts to really like consider and sit with. So I guess to close off our last question, what words of wisdom would you give to students who are joining us today, or anyone who's joining us today?
Well, I'll start and let Ibu get the last word there, because I want to hear. I could sit at your feet all day, man, and just enjoy it. I think picking up on one of the things that Ibu said when he was talking about Franklin Graham is all of us need to beware of the poison of self-righteousness. And Jesus called it the yeast of the Pharisees, right? And it's interesting because if you look at Jesus's harshest words, they weren't for people on the fringes of the faith. They were for the people at the center of the religious elite, right? The self-righteous folks that he said, you heap heavy burdens on people. And he said, he called them a brood of vipers. And he even went so far as to say the tax collectors and the prostitutes are entering the kingdom ahead of you. Yeah, that'll ruffle some feathers, right? Everybody that you've excluded is coming in ahead of you in the reign of God. And so it's sort of like saying, you can be sure if you build a wall between yourself and someone else that God's on the other side, right? That anytime our theology, our faith begins to lock people out rather than open our hearts to deeper love, then it's problematic. And so I think, of what we often do is we take the best in ourselves and we compare it to the worst in our adversaries. And what Jesus actually teaches us to do is find the deepest contradictions in ourselves, the log in our own eye, before we work on the speck in someone else's. And so I think that invitation is to work on our own hypocrisies, work on our own contradictions, and be quick to find some kind of handhold or foothold that we can work together with someone else on. And I think your example with Franklin Graham's a great one. I'm down, south, and Franklin Graham goes to the same church as my sister-in-law and brother-in-law. And I've told them, I hope I bump into him, and I can promise you I'll be respectful, but I will not avoid him. And I will definitely try to take him out to lunch. we need some conversation to happen. But anyway, I think that self-righteousness is toxic, and it has so many different flavors, right? There's a conservative side that I grew up with, this kind of legalistic, I don't smoke, drink, or chew, or go out with girls that do, right? That was what I grew up with. But there's a progressive version, right? There's a social justice self-righteousness that makes ourselves feel morally superior by making other people feel inferior. And I think that is also dangerous. So as students and others that are listening, let's kind of keep working on ourselves, and let's keep working for ways that we can find some kind of place to start in relationship with people that disagree with us.
Yeah, I love that. I know how dangerous self-righteousness is, because I spent like 35 years baking in my own self-righteousness, and it's toxic to oneself, right? Like, you learn a lot less. You turn a lot of people off. I woke up one day, I didn't want to be that person anymore. I didn't like I didn't like other people when they were like that. I didn't like myself. So it's just, you learn a lot more, right? And again, there are parameters of decency. There are parameters of decency. I'm not buying a brownie from a KKK bake sale, but my wife tried hundreds of civil rights cases, and she's had 14 federal trials, mostly in lawsuits against police officers or on police misconduct, and not an iota of it is about is about dislike for the police. It's about helping people live up to the honor of their profession, right? That's how she views it, right? It's about giving dignity back to people whose dignity was taken, and it's about helping people live up to the honor of their profession. I think that this idea of I want to help you be your best self. That's what I loved about Dorothy Day, right? The sense of I want to help you be your best self, right? Aimé Césaire, there is room for all of us at the rendezvous to destiny. And, King, I'll leave you with this quote from King. You have very little morally persuasive power with people who can feel your underlying contempt, right? So, and again, I think about my friends in the Biden campaign and the Biden administration, and thank God that, they I don't think President Biden is much of a self-righteous person, at least not anymore. And the people he has with them don't strike me that way. But you can imagine if all you did was heap contempt on the voters of the other side for months and months and months, and now you're turning around and saying, trust me when I tell you the vaccine is safe, you have a long distance to travel and a high mountain to climb, right? Right. And so, I think the path of Jesus, I think the path of the Prophet Muhammad, may the peace of God, blessings of God be upon him, is I invite you into the circle of goodness, and I invite you to be your best self. That's what it is, right? And it's an invitation. So I appreciate you having me. I come with the highest respect for Lincoln University and for Eastern University. I come with an awful lot of love and admiration for Shane Claiborne. Thank you for having us.
I got you. Yeah,
and Alia and Tian, what a terrific job,
yeah,
really. And everybody's been part of the Courageous Pluralism program. Great job. I'm proud to be in this circle with you.
Same here.
Well, wow. I'll just say wow. Thank you to Dr. Patel and to Shane Claiborne. I took copious notes. I hope you did also, and we're grateful to you both. Friends, before we end our event today, and we'll just end it in a couple of minutes, all those who have registered for the Zoom webinar, you have entered into a book raffle for one of the books by our special speakers today. So we're actually going to, raffle off Acts of Faith, which is Dr. Evil Patel's book, The Story of an American Muslim and Struggle for the Soul of a Generation, and Shane Claiborne's book with Dr. Tony Campolo, Red Letter Revolution. What if Jesus really meant what he said? We have 3 copies of each book. So if you register for the webinar, by tomorrow at 5 o'clock, if you receive an email that you're one of the winners, we'll just ask you for your name and mailing address, and we'll mail you the copy of the book, either Dr. Patel's or Shane Claiborne's. And so that's just a little bit of an added gift for those of you that have been participating today. One of the things, as I was listening to Dr. Patel and Shane, was a book by Barbara Brown Taylor called Holy Envy, Finding God in the Faith of Others. And she's got a great line, which I think it maybe even summarizes a bit about courageous pluralism. This is what Barbara Brown Taylor writes when she is reflecting upon teaching religions at a college in Atlanta. She said, "The only clear line I draw these days is this: when my religion tries to come between me and my neighbor, I will choose my neighbor." I get a sense that courageous pluralism is about choosing our neighbor and keeping that priority. And so we want to just come to the end of our event. We're going to wrap up in another minute. Many thanks to Dr. Evil Patel, Shane Claiborne, our student moderators, Aaliyah Matthew and Tian Chestnut. What a great job you did. To President Matthews for his remark, and for Mary Johnson, who needed to leave because of her final exams. She's got to take that final exam, for her presentation for the Yacht Club's 25th anniversary. And to Interfaith Youth Corps, Lincoln University, Eastern University, for collaboration and commitment to this project of courageous pluralism. And let's not forget Sue Yavor and Taylor Gray for all their astute technical assistance. Thanks again for your kind presence, and for your commitment to courageous pluralism. We'll say goodbye for now. God bless you and goodbye.